Hello, everyone. This is Jeff from We the Indivduals, and here with me is the charming and talented Amanda BillyRock, fellow activist, blogger, and anarchist. How are you doing, Amanda?
I'm so good. Just another day in anarchist paradise.
I like that terminology. I need to start using that from now on. Actually, I was doing some homework before calling you, and I watched. I think they're awesome because I've always wanted to do them. The economics in one lesson videos that you're doing. It was episode 3, I think, Blessings of Destruction, where you're bringing up the Blockbuster analogy and saying video prices go up $2.99, and I saw it said Twilight video $2.99. I was like, wait, no Twilight video is worth $2.99. But unfortunately, no one was around to hear that, so I could only laugh to myself.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I enjoyed making it.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite. It's probably one of my favorite books. So I thought it's a great primer for people, especially to get into anarchism. It's great.
Thanks, Jeff.
Probably the first question I want to ask is actually, what do you love about anarchy?
That it meshes with my nature perfectly. I feel that I operate best when free, I think best, I work best, I am my best when free, and I have the suspicion that that's kind of true of maybe most people. I can't speak for all people, but I have the suspicion that it's human nature to operate best when you can trade freely and produce freely and keep what you produce.
I think that's pretty much the same for all people, and I was telling Jeffrey this, that I think most people they just don't realize it yet, and it reminds me of your video when you actually came out as an anarchist, that, I was, like what you said, I was kind of getting the signs that you're becoming an anarchist because you're saying a little bit more terminology, but I think deep down that everyone is an anarchist in some way, and they just haven't realized it, They just haven't realized it at all.
Yeah, as Jeffrey Tucker likes to say, so much of our lives already do function in anarchy. I mean, almost everything you do within the walls of your own home is total anarchy, the way you associate with your friends and families and employees or employers. And none of that is really centrally planned for the most part. And then, of course, all of the nation states of the world are at anarchy with one another. We still manage to travel to Canada just fine and do business with Canadians just fine. In fact, the only hindrances to international trade are nation states themselves, not the fact that we don't live under the same laws. And so really, all that is good and with order and organization in life is in anarchy.
That's true. He said something, I'm not sure if you saw the interview, but he said something in this interview that just... I've used to explain it to every single person that I've actually come across that, Tucker said, I know you reject anarchism, but do me a favor. Think of everything in your everyday life that really involves the government. And I've been using that ever since he actually said that on the video, because when you come to think of it, I mean, of course someone's going to throw out the word roads to you, but that's just ridiculousness. But when you think about it, people want to avoid the DMV. They want to avoid the post office when they can. And you really, every single thing that you do, I mean, you have to actually, you don't really need the government in any of that, actually. So I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah, top-down central planning is chaotic because there's no, price mechanism, there's no profit and loss incentive, there's nothing to ensure that everybody's needs get met. And so it's bound to be chaotic.
Now, speaking of Jeffrey Tucker, how much of an influence was Jeffrey Tucker in encouraging you to get back to activism? Like, what did he say that inspired you to toss your hat back into the ring?
You got the timeline just right, because it was in my travels earlier this year when I stopped filming, I stopped putting things online, and I kind of started to maybe sink into a little bit of a liberty doldrums, and that was when I started reading my first Tucker. And I guess he inspired me to look at the world through, this is a term I heard from someone on Facebook the other day, look at the world through market-colored glasses. Because, it can be easy to get down from all the tyranny and to feel, almost defeated with all of the awful forces that are hurled at us every day. But when you look at the voluntary human element of it, you see that there are so many of us versus, them. And real prosperity comes from free trade. And so even people who love authoritarianism, even people who want to have rulers, you're hard pressed to find someone who doesn't want more wealth in their life. And so once it becomes more and more clear to people that peace and free trade bring prosperity, it's just a self-interested choice.
That's true. You said the naughty word wealth. That's kind of an evil word with anarchists. That a lot of people get a preconceived notion whenever they hear the word wealth. They kind of get on they throw up their red flags around us liberty lovers.
Yeah, I'll never understand the embracing of poverty as a virtue. That's ridiculous. That is downright ridiculous. We through interacting with one another, that is how we better our standards of living. And so looking down upon the betterment of standards of living is like looking down on people cooperating with one another. That's just completely senseless.
Now, were you before becoming a libertarian and anarchist, were you a neocon or a liberal beforehand?
I think that I was, for the most part, undecided beforehand. I think I was maybe a little confused. My senior year of high school, I did a scholarship pageant, which is like a nice name for a beauty pageant. And we had to pick a platform, and I picked voting as my platform, whereas like some people pick like world peace, that's the joke, like, oh, world peace, Miss America. I picked voting because I had a sense that it was important. But, growing up in state school, I didn't know the issues. I didn't know what was really going on. And so it wasn't until many years later when I started to really question what the heck was going on with the economy that I actually started to educate myself. So I didn't really come from a position of neocon or bleeding heart liberal. It was kind of nothing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think it was, I've been libertarian actually my entire life. I've never been anything else. And I think what really actually got me was it's actually always sticks out in my mind. The DARE program to keep my dad had this sticker that said "Dare to think for yourself."
Ooh.
And he told me, and it always stands out in my mind. I was probably 12 years old, and he always just told me, no matter what you do, just do what you want as long as you don't hurt anyone else. And that's and then he also told me he was a libertarian, which I didn't really know what it was. But my entire life, I was kind of the black sheep in the classroom, and I would always be asked if I had attention deficit disorder, but no, I just didn't like the class. It wasn't fun to me. But I think that just stuck with me my entire life. I've lived with liberal and neoconservatives, but I've always been a libertarian, so I'm pretty proud to actually say things like that.
Well done.
Now, when prior to the interview, one feedback that I did get was that from people, because I was asking people, what questions should I ask you, etc. One feedback that I got prior to the interview was that you appear to focus on the message and not ego, nor do you get caught up in personality cults. Now, there are some in the movement that start, out promoting liberty and reading out and to influence others that seem to get caught up in the politics, but was going to ask, what advice would you give others that want to avoid these productivity pitfalls?
I have to ask what exactly you mean by that, because I'm not actually sure I know what you mean by getting caught up in a cult of personality.
Kind of what I would think that it means is that, getting caught in the politics of anything, like getting caught in well, I'd hate to use him as a reference, but for instance, okay, let's just say Obama is a good cult personality. So versus not focusing on the message, you know, when they just get caught in the politics and they stop focusing on the message and they just focusing on the actual people, what kind of advice would you say to libertarians to actually, or people who want to get involved more to kind of avoid the actual politics but more the message?
Well, I think a great example would be Ron Paul, because he became so incredibly popular. I mean, I remember meeting teenagers who were like, yeah, Ron Paul. You know, like, what man in his 70s who has been tirelessly doing one thing for 30 years has teenagers flocking to him with adoration? And yet he never got caught up in his own image or popularity. And so I think that as long as your passion to deliver the message is your driving force, you know, just look at Ron Paul. You can become the most popular person in the world, and as long as your intentions are what they started out being, it doesn't matter how popular you are.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. When he, in 2008, when he was doing his presidential campaign, he's mentioning there's videos filming him prior to the debates, and, you know, people are coming up to him and saying, this is your revolution. He's like, no, this is your revolution. But I think Tucker even mentioned that, and he was more about the message more than anything else, and that's always really good to hear from other, you know, liberty advocates. So that's one, you know, feedback that we did get, you know, specifically from you, was you seem to be less in the spotlight, but just want to actually get your message out there versus, you know, wanting to be stuck in the spotlight and be, you know, all about yourself versus the message. So that's one feedback that I did get from you before, you know, the interview came up.
Well, that was nice of them to say.
How do you handle it, actually? I mean, do you get a lot of, you know, kind of Amanda BillyRock cult personality fans flocking to your page?
No, I really only get, you know, every person who messages me is just so sincere, and I'm so flattered. Every time I get a message from someone, you know, whether they're saying hi or whether they're saying I like your stuff or whether they're, you know, whatever, it's so flattering to me that someone would actually take time out of their day and send me a message. That is so flattering to me, and it just makes my day. And so, yeah, I don't really see anyone as being silly about me or anything, because we just communicate as friends.
That's true. That's kind of actually being down to earth is always nice as well. I think that's really good for, you know, the quote liberty movement, is because you can actually talk to people on a person-to-person basis versus, you know, an actual personality, and that's actually one great way I think that you've done and is a great way to do in general, is by spreading liberty, is by talking to someone, not talking down on them, but talking on their same level, and then they'll be a lot more open-minded to, you know, someone else who's actually in the spotlight and, you know, talks down to someone or may not appreciate someone who, because they're not on their actual level.
You know, I mean, the freedom mentality is that it is the individual that matters above all. Groups do not matter. Groupings of people do not matter. So if it really is the individual that is of ultimate importance, and I believe that it is, then there is no person too insignificant. There is no person too small or too not on your level. That doesn't exist.
So are you a fan of, since I use quotes, are you a fan of that terminology, you know, the liberty movement, when it's actually used?
You know, I really get frustrated with the words that we have at our disposal because, you know, even though I use that terminology, like liberty movement, that almost marginalizes it, because I don't think that it's a liberty movement. I think that it's us waking up to our humanity, waking up to our inherent natures. You know, so calling it a movement makes it sound like it's something that's new, or something like that, when I don't think it's new at all. I think it's as ancient as humanity itself.
Right.
But I guess I haven't thought of any better terms yet.
Yeah, I'm kind of guilty of that too, because this might sound bad to people that use the term liberty movement, but I've always kind of, since it's been used, or at least I hear it more lately, it seems that when people say, I hear the term bad for the liberty movement quite a lot. So I've always, and I might get a lot of hate for this, but I've always found it a little bit ironic and contradictory to say, to claim to be an individual, but then call upon a collective movement. But at the same time, like you, I can't think of anything else to actually describe, what it is that we're actually experiencing right now. But it's a catch-22, because saying movement and it kind of sets off alarms in my head about collectives and groupthink mentality, which not one libertarian will agree on one thing. I mean, you and me, we of course are anarchists, but there might be something that we disagree on. But I think as long as our principles are the same is what matters. But I don't think that there's a dictated, prerequisites on, how libertarians must achieve liberty as long as it's done.
Yeah, I think the battle for terms is actually a really important one, because as we know, the term liberal used to mean the opposite of what it is now, and the term conservative used to mean not quite the opposite, but something very different from what it means now. And so that is why even though some people think anarchist is a scary word, I still insist on using it, because, its Greek root means no rulers, a people without rulers. And so when you have people twisting that word to mean chaos or violence or lawlessness, they're doing it for their own political gain, and I'm not okay with that. And so I think it's super important that we insist upon the defining of terms.
That's a good point. I liked actually how you used in one of your videos the advocate for a stateless society. That was actually really clever. Because I've heard voluntarist, I've heard anarchist, but I've never heard advocate of a stateless society. So I was like, oh, that's actually quite clever. So
thanks.
And I like anarchist, and I stick to anarchist because I think it kind of Tucker said it kind of sparks, intrigue into someone's mind. They're like, ooh, what's that about? And they kind of want to find out a little bit more about you. And sometimes you'll get the people that are just stubborn and belligerent and want to argue, but some other people will actually listen and engage with you. And I think the defining terms is pretty important also.
Yeah, I think that constantly having to choose a new term for yourself when someone else tries to co-opt your word and change the definition for their own gain, if you don't insist on keeping that word, if you say, oh, I'll just go get another word, I'll say agorist or sovereign citizen or voluntarist or this or that, you're marginalizing yourself. You're allowing someone else to make you constantly use new words. And then you're always keeping yourself in the new movement, the new minority. And I don't like that.
Yeah, I have friends that actually prefer the term voluntarist, but to me it's that if you say voluntarist, to me it's like you're beating around the bush. You're going to be telling them that you're an anarchist anyway, so why not just say anarchist?
I agree. I agree.
Now, you recently said that you respect the mindset of authoritarians over classical liberals, which some would consider painful to read. So in general, who would you say your target audience is? Classical liberals or statists?
I think, just to be clear on the quote, I said limited government, advocates of limited government. And I didn't... Well, that post was made in frustration, so I think it's interesting that someone latched onto it and wrote a whole article about it. It was really just a moment of frustration. But I wouldn't say that I have targets in general. People say minarchists and anarchists should be aligned. There's no reason that we should, have infighting, or that strange term that people use. I have no desire to fight with anyone, because that's a waste of my time. I don't want to fight with a person. I want to talk about ideas. You know, I want to pit one idea against another idea and discuss the merits of both and decide which is a better idea. And so, you know, be it classical liberals or statists or whatever, I don't really care what they are or what they call themselves. I want to talk ideas and I want to get some things hammered out. I want you to defend your position to me that says the initiation of force on peaceful people is okay, because that shouldn't go untalked about. If you support the state, you believe, by definition, that the initiation of force on peaceful people is okay. And I want you to defend that position to me and to everyone else so that we can talk about ideas.
If I could, I'd give you a high five right now, because I'm guilty of the same thing. But which leads me to my next question. Since you came out, you know, being an anarchist, have you received a little bit more backlash or negative feedback or beef from minarchists, you know, since you've actually come out? And if you have, how have you dealt with it?
I mean, the only time I ever get negative feedback would be like in the comment sections of videos or posts or whatever. But they're never really attacking my position so much as they're saying, we just need to get back to the Constitution. We just need to get back to the Constitution. You know, so they're not really attacking the non-aggression principle. They're just insisting that if we were to abide by this document that's supposed to apply to people who didn't sign it, that would somehow make things okay. And so, yeah, that would probably be really the only backlash, if you could call it that.
Yeah, on the Facebook page that I run, you know, whenever it has a strong roots in, it has a bunch of classical liberals as fans, and I used to be at first, you know, kind of skeptical or hesitant to post anything anarchist on my page, and then as time went on, I just didn't care. I just started posting anything that I found appealing to anarchy. But in the comment sections and pictures, I get the same thing, you know, that, you know, here invoking our founders wanted this, the Constitution says that, and I admire the founders, and they had good heads on their shoulders. They had good intentions, but at the same time, I think that I also kind of get a little bit aggravated that when they bring it up, it's like what you said, you want them to defend their position. I just can't see the rationality in, you know, defending a piece of paper that was meant for the government to limit itself. I just can't get past that, because no matter what, once you put people in charge, looking back on history, you're going to have endless excuses to expand that power, and whenever someone invokes that terminology, you know, the Constitution, I just can't even actually get past that thinking at all.
Right. It's interesting that you bring up, you know, that moment that you decided, okay, I'm going to post some anarchist stuff on my wall, because I was surprised when I first started using like the A word all the time and started posting anarchist things all the time. I thought that I was going to, you know, be marginalized and lose, you know, online followers. But I was really surprised to find out that there are a ton of anarchists out there, like tons of them. And it's so awesome, because I had no idea that that community, if you want to call it that, was so big, and that they're online. And so I was super psyched to see all of the people who came out of the woodworks once I started that.
So when you actually do talk to, you know, being someone, being in your position, whenever you, what advice would you give, you know, anarchists like you and me who do talk to minarchists or, you know, Republicrats? Because, you know, I myself sometimes, whenever I speak with them, I get a little bit aggravated and I want them to get my point right away. But I sometimes think that, you know what, just as long as you plant a seed, then that'll get them to start thinking about it. So is there any advice that you would give anarchists like us whenever they discuss anything with minarchists to persuade them, you know, that...
I think first you have to establish whether or not the person you're talking to is using reason, whether or not they're willing to see reason, because you can't reason with an unreasonable person. That's a waste of your time. That's an exercise in futility. So if you establish that the person is in fact willing to use reason, I don't think that there's cause for there to be like anger or conflict in that way. If the person, refuses to see your position and you say, well, it's been nice conversing with you. Thanks for your time and have a nice day. There's no reason to get involved in an aggravated debate with someone who has established that they refuse to acknowledge the morality of the non-aggression principle. So just let it go. There are plenty of other people who do want to talk to you and do want to hear and do want to discuss. So go find those people.
That's true. I usually, sometimes I will forget. I'm not sure if you had the same experience that, I think that quote of the difference between you actually quoted this, the difference between a minarchist and an anarchist is 6 months. So, I sometimes forget that, whenever I'm talking to someone that is actually not an anarchist, I sometimes forget the transgression period and want to turn them into an anarchist overnight. So I'm guilty of that sometimes. But I even have friends myself that are actually, were pro-Obama a year and a half ago. But now, whenever I'm sharing stuff that have to do with anarchy or on my page, I now even see these same individuals from a year ago, even more, actually starting to like it a little bit more, and they're actually talking about it a little bit more. So that's, I think, what you said in planting the seed is probably the most two important things. As long as you can get someone reasonable, there's, sometimes it'll get you down, but, I think those little accomplishments, like the one that I mentioned, are actually what, keep me going.
Yeah, there are so many people out there who, are questioning and who want someone to talk to and who want someone to reach out to them, especially young people. There are so many out there. Like, I get emails, from teenagers being like, I'm one of the only people in my high school to speak out about these things and to think about these things. And, like, that's who we should be spending our time on. Like, these kids who are trying to wake up and speak some truth, in atmospheres of lies. There's no reason for us to waste our time with people who actually just want to pick fights with us and call us anarcho-capitalist dogmatists or whatever it was that guy said about me in that article. There's no reason for us to waste time in that land when there are kids in high school who are saying, hey, talk to me, send me materials, like, please support me in my intellectual journey.
What was it that was the last thing that you're kind of clinging on to as a limited government libertarian? What was it like was it the army? Was it the courts that kind of kept you hanging on?
Truth be told, it was because the Ron Paul campaign was going on, and I was like, I wasn't working for them officially, but like on my own, I was working for them. And so it was during actually Mises University last summer when they lay out the full case for road privatization, security privatization, justice privatization. And I thought, oh my gosh, like, it's so possible. It's so plausible. It's so simple that I thought anarchy could totally work. But it was still during the 2012 campaign, so I just kind of like kept that under wraps. So really, I wasn't actually clinging to anything there at the end, except the hopes that Ron Paul would win.
I think it's like a 2-minute video when you're kind of explaining what Amanda BillyRock YouTube was, and I think it was just the same with me that at first I was as limited government as possible. Yeah, we still need it for the courts and the courts and actually the police and etc. But at one point I just became, I don't think I really read anything. It was just I wasn't sure that but courts and police could be done. I wasn't sure how it could be done. Mm-hmm. I just, like you, came to the conclusion, the non-aggression principle, that even though I didn't know how it could be done in a free society, I just came to the conclusion that regardless, it was just, violated the non-aggression principle, no matter what, just came down to it. And yeah, it seems black and white, but I can't see anything past that.
Yeah, I like the analogy that, say the government were to nationalize the production of shoes. Like 50 years down the road, if you were to suggest, maybe we should privatize shoe production. You'd have people saying, but how? Do you want everyone to go without shoes? Do you want the children to go without shoes? How many factories would there be? How many foremen would there be? How would they hire the employees? What would they make the shoes out of? And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. That will sort itself out. Like, justice and defense are just services. And so if the market can provide the services of massage and legal representation and car washing, there's no reason whatsoever that the market can't also provide the services of justice and defense.
Yeah, it's ironic that you mention that, because For New Liberty by Rothbard, that particular chapter, if that's who you were quoting, actually, that chapter, I actually listened to that like over a year ago when he talked about, government and business, the public sector. And he said that specific part where he said, it's easy to be smart alecky about government. That chapter was like the chapter that pretty much just pushed me the rest of the way then, as far as making me become a full and actual anarchist. That's pretty awesome that you actually quoted that, because I'm always posting that and reading that particular chapter over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, I enjoyed that book quite a lot as well.
How does your family, take that you're an actual anarchist? Are they in the same boat as you, or are they a little bit our crazy daughter the anarchist? Or
some of them are in the same boat as me, and some of them I am confident are getting there.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Who's the hardest to persuade?
That would be the patriarch of the family.
Yeah, that's typical. My father, himself, he's always been libertarian, and my uncle has always been libertarian, and they're one reasons why I've always been into politics and history. But I'm still trying to get them, but they're still at the what about the warlords part of being confused about, or at least concerned about anarchy as the warlords rising up and taking over in criminal gangs and etc. So they're still stuck there, but I'm trying to get them eventually.
Yeah, I wish it could be more obvious to state that the warlords are already in power. That's the current situation. No reason to fear it. It's already here.
I think it might be a little bit simplistic of an answer, but if I'm paying for a voluntary firm who I can stop paying at any time, I fail to see how that's worse than mandatory paying a monopoly on law, aka the government, for those services. I kind of fail to see how the former is worse than the actual latter. And that's a simplistic argument because you're not going into theory and detail, but I think that's probably one of the best arguments that you can actually get.
Yeah, the state is the only corporation that can legally use slave labor and force you to purchase its products. I mean, with the diminishment of that, things can only get better.
Now, I saw a video with you and Jeffrey Tucker where you're kind of sharing Bitcoin information online.
That was fun.
I don't know much about Bitcoin, and from what I saw, you seemed pretty excited on that video about Bitcoin. So, with the states, ultimately in decline, is there any sort of technological innovation that you're excited about, like enthusiastic about, that would make the state even more obsolete?
Oh, for sure, for sure. Well, aside from obviously Bitcoin, I love 3D printers. I saw my first one in real life at PorcFest last week. This guy who was camping next to us brought one, and it was like the size of a microwave. I had imagined them to be these huge, elaborate, bulky things, but it was the size of a microwave, and he had it plugged in the whole time, and he was printing things the whole time. And then there are, and obviously that opens the doors to, guns have already been printed, which is awesome. You can print your own, like, prosthetic medical devices. I mean, you can print whatever you want, really. I'm also super excited about this medical device that's being developed in California that allows you to, it's like a doctor was telling me about it. It's like a diagnostic tool. Like, you can set it to your temple and it will read your vitals in a way that you would usually have to go to the doctor's office to get them read. And so as Obamacare makes healthcare more and more unaffordable, I've already heard about people paying doctors cash to actually make house visits. And so that's gonna become the norm, I think. Like, we're all gonna be operating on the free, aka black, market, and it's devices like this that are going to make that more workable.
That's true. Actually, I saw this new actual innovation today on one of my friends' pages, that it was not the typical cast that you kind of put around your arm that kind of covers it as a shell, but it's like a skeleton that...
It looked like a spider web or something, right? Yeah, I saw that. I was like, yeah.
Wow. So whenever I see these things, I'm so happy that the government brought us these things, so to make our lives
right,
to make our lives better.
Right.
Is that now? Watching your economics in one lesson video. Sorry to backtrack a little bit, but watching that, is there a, Keynesian economics is pretty popular. I mean, not popular. That's a horrible way to say it. It's used a whole lot, but is there a particular, aside from Keynesian economics, is there a economic philosophy or ideology that isn't Austrian economics, that when you hear, you just want to pick it apart, or it just gets you amped to talk about, to want to debate about?
I mean, I don't know about, like, the specific terms for different economic theories that I guess I would be opposed to, but, I mean, just the Keynesian idea of, like, a multiplier effect, that somehow wealth can be created from nothing, and that inflation is somehow anything other than the devaluation of a currency. Just those notions that magic exists, basically, that the government that Bernanke can wave a wand and thus magic will be created. Just, anything that any theory that ignores the laws of supply and demand is just, a bunch of baloney.
There's this picture that I saw once that had a picture of Santa on it, and it said the Keynesian multiplier. It's kind of like believing in Santa, and it's been viral all over the internet. But every single time I see the Keynesian multiplier, I always think of course, one, the broken window, and then second, I always think of Santa Claus whenever that actually comes up.
Right.
Now that you're anarchist, is there an actual classical liberal thinker that you still love to actually talk about, or at least that's one of your favorite thinkers?
Well, I mean, other than, the founder of the Austrian school, Karl Menger, the guy whose name is on the institute of the world's premier Austrian institute is Mises. And Mises was not an anarchist, but it was through his teachings that Rothbard became an anarchist. And so, yeah, I mean, just because someone was not an anarchist doesn't mean that their, philosophies are any less relevant to the development of thought that has led us to the belief that statelessness is the only way that freedom can actually exist for everyone.
What's the common misconception that you pretty much get the most, or a straw man argument that you get the most, now that you are an anarchist? Is it the roads? It
is the argument that because people aren't perfect, that there needs to be government.
I know where this is going.
And it's just, the opposite is true. because people aren't perfect, there shouldn't be rulers. Because then imperfect people are going to do imperfect things to others. And so it's really just the silliest, saddest argument.
I think you've probably seen that meme online that's circular that goes, people are bad, so we need government made up of people.
People are bad, so we need, yes, yeah, that's a great one.
So that's probably the one that I get the most, and even looking back when I was a minarchist, that maybe I just didn't realize it, and looking back, and it's like you said in your video, it's kind of like a great weight that's taking off your shoulders, because you just actually realize it. But looking back, I kind of mentally slapped myself in the face, because I would even think, looking back at it as a minarchist, that even as a minarchist, you're not acknowledging it, but at the same time, you're not really defending, the same circular argument that people are bad. So, whenever I encounter that, when someone says people are bad, we need government, I usually say, okay, so you want to put those same people in charge of the money and the guns. But then they even take it further and say, yeah, well, no government is perfect, but we need to work with what we have. And then that goes back. We need to go back to the founders. Then it kind of becomes even one big, more circular loop.
Yeah, I like to see the different forms of government, like democracies or monarchies or what have you, as kind of like different glasses of poison. We have like a glass of arsenic, like a glass of strychnine or whatever. And, people say, oh, we have to choose one of the glasses of poison because, we have to work with what we have. You have to have something. It's like, no, you don't have to drink poison at all, you silly goose. Just don't. It's a false dilemma saying you have to choose arsenic or strychnine. That's a false dilemma. You don't actually have to have either.
That's true. Now, since you've become an anarchist and what you mentioned about the Ron Paul campaign in 2012, are you yourself kind of a inside the system person, or are you a outside the system person as far as reducing the state? Because, there's the people like, for instance, like Rand Paul supporters that are anarchists. They want to fight the system within the system, but are you more for doing so outside the system?
Outside. You hear that analogy sometimes. You don't get up high into the mafia to then convince the mafia that it should reduce its power. That's not how it happens.
I think as far as looking back in the system, when people mention, bringing change through voting ourselves into freedom, I can't help but, this is how I should ask it, do you ever feel that sometimes, do you ever become conflicted with that position? Because, my mindset, because I'm a little bit conflicted, is obviously if we can get enough people like you and me in office, then we'll bring change. That's one side of the argument. But on the other side of the argument, where I'm for outside the system as well, do you also feel that it's kind of the same as if we get enough people to be outside the system, we can change it as well? Do you ever feel that way, kind of a conflict between the two?
Well, I just think that being involved in an immoral system is an immoral thing to do. So I don't see how I can promote morality through, being paid with tax dollars and passing legislation that's going to have to be enforced by immoral courts and immoral police. I don't see how that can work. And then, of course, you get the people saying, well, you supported Ron Paul, and he was a politician. And the fact is that Ron Paul didn't get any legislation passed. And he also didn't stop any legislation from being passed. As far as a voting politician, he was completely ineffectual in every way. The only thing he did was get a speaking platform. And that was then. And the election is over, and this is now. And so, yeah, I don't even want to go on government property. I don't even like driving, because I don't like being vulnerable like that, like totally subject to cops pulling me over and being like, hey, let me look in your car. I don't even like being on government property. So yeah, I want nothing to do with the state whatsoever.
That's cool. I think you hit the nail on the head. As far as Ron Paul, myself, as far as changing inside the system, I always look back and try and tell people, we've been trying to vote ourselves into freedom for the last 200 years, and has the state grown or has it shrunk?
Right.
But also, someone like Ron Paul or even Rand, I'm not for inside the system myself, but I think, even though I don't think it's possible, I think what Ron and Rand are doing are positive, because at least it's bringing messages like yours and mine to people who may not be convinced, that inside the system may not be the way of doing it. So although he's doing it in a way that I'm not for, at least, people like Ron Paul, are actually bringing that message and doing it the right way. So at least people are picking up on the ideas. And I think it's the ideas that actually change. And maybe I might be historically inaccurate, but I can't really think of much reduction of government done by people going into a voting booth and voting the right person in. I think it's been done more by ideas or, counter economics, etc.
You're right. Well, this will have to be my closing statement. But yeah, when Ron Paul started out in the 70s, there was no internet, and so his getting a platform to speak in government was such a boon to the message, because all there was government-controlled television and radio. That's all there was. And so now that anyone, you and I included, can publish whatever we want to the rest of the world within seconds, we don't need to get elected to office to have a position to speak. Our position, our platform is here.
That's really well hit. So what's, aside from your closing statement, what's next for you? Because you're quite the globetrotter. So is there any new next event for you or next destination? Because you're in New Zealand now, you're back.
Yeah.
Is there anything next on your agenda?
I actually am trying to figure out where to move this fall, because I am definitely moving somewhere. And I'm considering New Hampshire, Free State. I'm also considering Lone Star Libertopia down in Austin. And, there's even the Blue Ridge Liberty Project in North Carolina. And so other than all of the work that I'm putting up on my website and the speaking gigs that I have coming up, I'm also trying to figure out where to move, because I definitely want to live in a liberty atmosphere where I know that people have my back.
So not a blue state?
No.
Well, Amanda, like I said, I barely started getting into your videos within the last 2 weeks when we agreed to this, but it's been very great to get to know your philosophies and your stances and you as a person as well, and I want to thank you very much for, taking your time out of your busy schedule to do the interview.
Thanks so much, Jeff. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. Have a great night.
Okay, you too.